What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to celebrate the 50th anniversary of one of the most groundbreaking movies of the 1970s, Robert Altman's Nashville. And as I was looking at the calendar of 1975, I saw that there were a lot of really strong contenders. And I'll be tackling Jaws next week. But the day before Nashville came out, we had Woody Allen's Love and Death. And on the same day as Nashville, we had Arthur Penn's Night Moves. And I was like, all right, I can't do three 50th anniversary videos in the same week because they're more time consuming because I'm just more interested in these topics. But when I really had to kind of think long and hard about it, I've seen Love and Death twice and I love it. I think it's hysterical. And I just discovered Night Moves, and it's a really gnarly, down and dirty crime film, which I thoroughly enjoy, with the legendary Gene Hackman, R.I.P. Gene Hackman. But with Nashville, it's one of those movies where I watch it every couple of years, and every time I watch it, I like it a little bit more. And as I was getting prepared for this video, I watched it just for fun. Then I watched it with the Robert Altman commentary, which I had never done before. And then I watched it again, and each time I'm like, God damn, I thought I liked this movie, but now I really like this movie. So Nashville is the clear-cut contender for my anniversary video this week.
You get your hair cut. You don't belong in Nashville.
But in that, I'm hoping to persuade a few people to see this movie for the first time. I'll go totally spoiler-free until I give you a verbal warning, as well as a time code down in the description below as to when I might be discussing some plot-specific details. But for people who know the movie, there's not a ton of plot to speak of, even though it's a very long movie. And it's one of those movies, the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, this is a really long flick. Now I wish it was like 9 hours long. I wish you could just give me more Nashville. Apparently, there are not a lot of outtakes that could be put back in apart from just more music. But the loose premise for Nashville, this is how they describe it, ripped straight from the pages of IMDb. Over the course of a few hectic days, numerous interrelated people prepare for a political convention. And that kind of gets it done, but for me, this is basically 3 days in the lives of 24 fascinating characters, all of whom are going to kind of collide and intersect and interact as this political campaign is unfolding in Nashville for a brand new party called the Replacement Party. And that political campaign is looking to recruit musicians, what they call redneck music, to be a part of their overall campaign for spreading their message. But it's a bit of rock and roll, it's a bit of country, it's a lot of culture, a lot of politics, a lot of casual sex, a lot of horrific, unexpected violence. It's just an absolutely fascinating movie. And I think it verges on becoming one of those classic hangout movies that Quentin Tarantino is always describing when he's talking about Rio Bravo and Dazed and Confused, where you just watch the movie because you want to hang out with those characters. And I feel much the same way about Nashville, because when I rewatch this movie, I just want to spend a few more hours in the company of these incredible characters. But before I get into all the incredible cast that's involved in this movie, let's just talk a little bit about Robert Altman. I got movie obsessed in the late 90s, and at that time, Robert Altman was enjoying this massive career comeback, because in the 80s, he was out in the wilderness. He was still working, but he was not the cultural force that he was in the 70s. But in the early 90s, he staged a massive comeback with The Player and Shortcuts. And suddenly, Robert Altman was back. So during the kind of indie film craze of the 90s, there were a lot of people that were giving shout-outs to Robert Altman, saying, well, if you love the movies of today, well, then you'll really love the movies that Robert Altman made back in the 1970s. And I basically was following his movies in real time from like the mid-90s through like the early 2000s. And every once in a while I'd go back and watch one of his classics. But what also helped kind of resurrect interest in his career at that time was the book Easy Riders, Raging Bulls by Peter Biskin, which helped me discover a lot of films by Hal Ashby and Arthur Penn and Robert Altman and Sam Peckinpah and any luminary from that period that you care to mention. But over the years, I realized rather than kind of getting a comprehensive view of Robert Altman's career, what I basically ended up doing was just rewatching McCabe and Mrs. Miller in Nashville over and if I get the light right, rewatching these two movies over and over and over again. But in the 1970s, he made 13 movies. I mean, there are a lot of great directors in the 1970s, from Coppola to Scorsese to De Palma or whomever. But Robert Altman is a strong contender for the most prolific. Even Woody Allen wasn't keeping up with Robert Altman's pace at that time. But what I realized as I was getting prepared for this video, as I went back and addressed a lot of my blind spots from that period, a case could be made for Robert Altman, depending upon which movies you watch, that the 1970s established him as the best American director. But if you watch the wrong movies, you might say, oh, well, he's the most atrocious, overrated director of the 1970s because he was just that prolific. There's enough evidence for either narrative, whichever narrative you want to push. Because let's say hypothetically you started with MASH and went into McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and then The Long Goodbye, California Split, Nashville, Three Women. He would rapidly become one of your favorite filmmakers. But let's say hypothetically you started with this film from 1969, That Cold Day in the Park, and then went straight into Brewster McCloud, and then saw Images, which I have right here, and then went into Thieves Like Us, which I also have right here, and then you skipped Nashville, and you went into Buffalo Bill and the Indians, or Sitting Bull's History Lesson. Then you watched A Wedding, and then watched Quintet. I mean, Quintet, Tarantino describes it as the worst movie ever made by a major studio. I'll go one step further. I think Quintet is the worst movie ever made by a legendary director. But let's say you'd only watch those movies. Well, then you might think, wait a second. Why is everybody celebrating Robert Altman? He's so overrated and he's got all these terrible movies. And that's just further evidence just how prolific he was at that time, where he could have so many classics and so many masterpieces and so many turkeys all within the same decade. And admittedly, there's no consensus on what are his best movies. I'm just talking about my own personal taste. I recently made some disparaging comments about Brewster McCloud compared to MASH.
If you think Robert Altman made a mess of the Army in MASH, wait till you see what he does to the cops in Brewster McCloud.
And much to my surprise and delight, hordes of Robert Altman fans were like, you are a fucking idiot, like MASH sucks and Brewster McCloud is incredible. I was like, you know what, I'm just relieved to see that there are all these kind of closet Robert Altman fans kind of lurking in the corners of Twitter, because I thought that a lot of these movies were more or less kind of forgotten, but apparently there are hordes of fans for Brewster McCloud. I do not consider myself one of them, but if your taste in humor, well, it's hard to characterize the sense of humor, but let's just say, obviously, humor is a very subjective thing, and for some people, Brewster McCloud speaks to them. For me, it makes me want to rip out my eyes and tear off my ears and all that good stuff. But as far as my own personal taste is concerned, as much as I love The Long Goodbye and California Split and Three Women, it's really McCabe and Mrs. Miller and Nashville that keep me coming back to Robert Altman. And I love his 90s stuff as well, because I was young and I was getting obsessed with movies. But McCabe and Mrs. Miller is one of the best goddamn westerns ever made. And Nashville, I don't really know how you characterize it, because not many movies have ever been made like that, where the plot is so loose and so elusive, where you've basically got like the entire city of Nashville mic'd up so that you're catching the background actors and the central players and so on and so forth, but you really just get immersed in this world. But if you watch the movie obsessively, certain storylines start to emerge as they kind of weave in and out of each other. And I guess it all depends upon which characters just grab your interest and get you sucked in. But each time I watch it, I'm blown away again, where I'm like, if the movie had just been slightly looser or had just slightly fewer like interesting characters, it could have just completely fallen to pieces and descended over into chaos and disaster. Like A Wedding has its moments and it has its great characters, but I think ultimately A Wedding is a pretty unsatisfying movie watching experience overall, even if it has great scenes and great characters that I love. But somehow Nashville just absolutely cast this spell over me. And I think it boils down to the fact that Nashville feels like this quintessential time capsule or snapshot of America at that time, right on the cusp of the bicentennial, where you're getting immersed in the art and the culture and the obsession with celebrity and the politics and, the sex and violence, where it just feels like almost like bumper cars of all these deranged lunatics crashing into each other. And it also helps that the music just fucking rules, or at least some of the music rules. Robert Altman very deliberately hired a lot of actors who were not up to the task of singing the songs that they were singing, because he didn't want it all to be perfect. And if they made mistakes, they stayed in the movie, very famously so. But you have a few legit musicians in there and a few legit singers. Also, to be perfectly blunt, I really don't know my ass from my elbow when it comes to country music. I'll go through phases where I'll listen to a bunch of Johnny Cash or a bunch of Hank Williams, but when it comes to what is the quintessential sound of Nashville from 1975, I know less than nothing. But there was a bit of controversy at the time where a lot of the established players in Nashville were like, wait a second, why are you making a movie about Nashville, not including us? Like, these are the good songs that are so popular in Nashville. Like, what the hell are you doing? So while there was pushback in 1975, over time the movie has been embraced, because once again, they're not trying to celebrate the superstars of that time. There are a lot of like stand-ins for the superstars of that time, but also a lot of people who are dreaming of making it one day, but they just don't pack the gear. They just don't cut it, and they're never going to make it.
Let me be the one to understand you.
And And I think what gives this movie the additional poignancy and the additional urgency that a lot of other movies lack is that the shadow of all the political assassinations of the 1960s, that shadow definitely looms large or kind of extends over this movie. And there are a few scenes that get into that, but I don't want to talk about the assassinations in too much detail yet because I'll end up drifting into to spoiler territory. But there is definitely a dark, foreboding underbelly to this movie. So as much as you might enjoy watching Karen Black just throwing down and making you laugh like hell and then making you just do cartwheels as she sings, there's always that hint of danger that prevents the movie from just descending into a few fun days at Opryland, which might be fun in real life, but it wouldn't be much of a movie. But let's start easing into the story itself, how they came up with the idea, and how they landed on shooting it in more or less kind of a pseudo-documentary style, which is what makes the movie so unusual and so unconventional for its time. The screenplay was written by Joan Tewksbury, who had collaborated with Robert Altman on a couple of his movies like These Like Us and McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and United Artists had already approached Robert Altman about doing yet another country western music movie called The Great Southern Amusement Company, but instead Robert Altman just sent Joan to Nashville and just said, keep a diary, take some notes, capture your experiences, and then we'll use that as the springboard for the movie to come. And while a ton of the dialogue is improvised by the actors in the movie, and you can only do that if you have an incredible cast, but the events, or kind of the sequence of events of the structure, is more or less based on the diary that Tewksbury kept at that time. Like incidents like the highway pileup. That's the first thing that happened to her when she arrived in Nashville, and so into the movie it went. And it's a great way to get the audience familiar with all the major characters in the story because you've got them all leaving the airport in this incredible herd and then getting stuck in traffic. And by the end of the first reel of the movie, you're more or less up to speed with all the central characters. And if you listen to Robert Altman's commentary, which is available on both the DVD as well as the Blu-ray, you don't need to buy both, but you can if you wish to. But if you listen to the commentary, which is absolutely fascinating, he talks a lot about how they would just kind of move as this giant herd to a location, and they would just invent these kind of setups or these scenarios. And they were constantly improvising on which locations they wanted to use. Like Robert Altman on the way to work every day kept seeing this giant junkyard. He's like, you know what? Grab the cast and crew. We're going there, and we're just going to create a little event, and we're going to unleash Geraldine Chaplin. She's just going to do what she does best. And obviously, you can only do that if you have actors that are as talented as Geraldine Chaplin, who, for me, completely steals this movie every step of the way. She's absolutely fucking hysterical.
These cars are trying to communicate. Oh, cars! Are you trying to tell me something?
But in addition to needing an incredible cast, you can only get away with this if you have an incredible cameraman like Paul Lohman, where he and his crew, they basically shot this movie like a documentary where you had so many non-actors and so many random people kind of inserting themselves into scenes. They were there just to kind of capture like the manic, madcap energy. And it just blows my mind that like Robert Altman could feel so comfortable having so little control over what the movie might be. Because I usually am drawn to directors where they have like a locked-in screenplay and a very clear idea of what they want the movie to look like, and they storyboard like crazy and has a really dynamic, specific visual look. But this movie, on the other hand, was made in a very loose, flexible fashion where Robert Altman, he welcomed the contributions of his actors. A lot of these actors were writing the songs that were included in this movie, including Keith Carradine, who won a friggin' Oscar for his song I'm Easy, which is one of the best scenes in the movie. But also, he would invite actors to contribute like lengthy dialogue, like that famous scene where the character of Barbara Jean just starts to ramble endlessly and just can't quite get back to singing her songs. The actress Ronnie Blakely, she came up with all that dialogue all on her own.
I'm gonna get you some lemonade. Oh, you're fine, darling. Fine. It's the microphone. Give me
I
my.
ain't done.
Oh, I know.
And what makes the atmosphere of the story and the style of the story so unconventional is how the movie keeps blurring the lines between documentary realism and narrative filmmaking, because all these actors, or many of these actors, have worked with Robert Altman many times before. Actors like Keith Carradine or actresses like Shelley Duvall. But sometimes the actors are playing characters, and sometimes they're playing themselves, and you're like, well, wait a second. Like, they should know each other, but they don't, because one's in character and one is playing themselves. Like, Elliot Gould shows up, and he's just playing Elliot Gould, and Ned Beatty has a really funny moment where he doesn't even know who Elliot Gould is.
Listen, you all come over. Haven wants to meet you right away. I didn't realize who you were when we first were introduced here. I'm different.
Or when Julie Christie shows up, I mean, she is the star of McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and she's playing herself, but the character played by Karen Black, Connie White, doesn't know who she is and thinks that everybody's playing a joke on her, saying that she's this world-class famous actress.
Isn't that an honor? What a surprise. Julie Christie.
There's been a lot of those movies.
And the end result is just this delicious feeling of expectation in the audience where you have no idea what's going to happen next. You have no idea who's going to show up next. You have no idea what they're going to do next. But you're just kind of, on the edge of your seat, just eating it up with a spoon like pudding every step of the way. And I don't want to get too high and mighty or get too lofty in my praise for this movie, but I feel like Robert Altman and his collaborators, they basically invented an entirely new form of storytelling with this movie. And I'm sure somebody's going to say, nope, you're wrong. Like, there was a movie made in France in 1969, which does the exact same thing. Like, fair play. I'm sure there are other examples of this kind of loose improvisational feel, whether it's in the world of Jean-Luc Godard or Jean Cassavetes or whomever. But maybe Robert Altman was the first person to kind of stir all these ingredients together so effectively, and he would do it again with Shortcuts. But with Shortcuts, you're basically dealing with Raymond Carver short stories. Like, I think it was like 3 or 4, and so you actually have like a foundation. You have some source material, whereas Nashville, like I said before, it's an original screenplay. It's an original idea. This is pure raw cinema, unlike anything that had been seen up to that time in movies. And I often talk about how there are a lot of writers out there where their ultimate dream or aspiration is to write the great American novel, a novel that can both capture and define a particular era in which it is published, a novel like The Great Gatsby. If you think about the Roaring Twenties, you think about The Great Gatsby. And when I think about the 1970s, I mean, some people are going to say Jaws, and some people are going to say Star Wars or Rocky or The Exorcist. I mean, luckily in the 1970s, there are a lot of great American movies. But there's something about Nashville because it leans into such a sense of naturalism. I feel like Nashville, for me, might be the most 70s movie ever made in the 1970s. And obviously, if I were to think long and hard about it, I could probably come up with a lot of healthy competition. But when people say, like, what are the movies that define the 70s? If Nashville is not on your list, well, then you just haven't watched it enough times.
Now, after years in the making, Robert Altman brings the big screen along the way to Nashville with 24. Count them, 24.
But I think I've put it off long enough. It's time to talk about some of the fascinating characters at the core of the story. And I won't be able to give equal coverage to all 24 of them. That would just be completely, totally ridiculous. But I am going to call attention to a few of my favorites. And, at the top of the list, with no close second, Geraldine Chaplin as Opal, this celebrity-obsessed BBC reporter who says she's making a documentary, but I never seem to see any cameramen following around. She just seems to do a lot of audio and a lot of interviews, and she is just absolutely delightful. And famously, she was the daughter of Charlie Chaplin. I'm sure you've heard of him. But Geraldine Chaplin was very well educated and spoke 4 different languages, and it allows her to do this thing where anytime she doesn't know what to say or she's improvising and she gets stuck, she'll just drift into another language. It's like a smoke screen where you're like, wait a second, why is she suddenly recording her dialogue in French? Like, I have no idea what the hell is going on. But she has this incredible sense of spontaneity and excitement where she can at least appear to be completely, totally invested in whatever conversation she's having. But then a bright, shiny object will appear, and boom, she's off in another direction.
It's Elliot Gould. It's Elliot Gould.
And in a lot of ways, we end up seeing the movie through her eyes because she's just so fascinated with everything. All the politicians, the musicians, the movie stars, the love affairs with rock stars, and all that stuff. She just completely, totally hurls herself into all of it. But ironically, even though she's trying to chronicle and catalog and record everything that's going on, some of the biggest events, she's like, wait a second, what just happened? Like, she manages to miss like the key events in spite of the fact that she's just trying to soak it all in. But there's something about her borderline, operatic way of expressing herself where she can switch gears and go into pure comedy that just makes me laugh like hell, where she'll seem so sincere, almost to the point of being a little bit overwrought, and then boom, on a dime, she's like, oh, you're a musician.
Excuse me. I thought I was completely alone here. How embarrassing. Oh, you're a musician.
In any event, if not for Geraldine Chaplin, I don't know if I would like this movie nearly as much. But luckily, she's got some really good company on that front. Like Keith Carradine as Tom Frank, who's part of a trio called Bill, Mary, and Tom. But let's just say that the trio is starting to come unglued. Tom is going to go solo, but there are some, lingering connections with his group that are making things all the more complicated. Also, I don't know if y'all can hear this right now. 2 floors up, they're drilling on something in the building. I can hear it, and it's distracting as hell. I hope it's not coming through on the microphone, but if periodically you see me kind of looking in annoyance up above, it's because there's just this incessant drilling, which is making the video all the more difficult to make, but I don't care. We're going to power through. But Keith Carradine was already a regular with Robert Altman. He had made McCabe and Mrs. Miller and Thieves Like Us. But this character is a strong contender for one of the best roles that Carradine has ever been able to play, because the character is filled with so much self-loathing. Well, on the surface, he's this great-looking guy, songwriter. Everybody wants to be near him. Women just like hurl themselves at him. But he can't spend any time alone. He can't, like, even if a woman is in bed with him, the moment she leaves, he's back on the phone calling the next girl, because he just can't be alone by himself for even a few seconds. And it leads to my favorite scene of the movie by far. And this is, I guess, spoiler light territory. So if I haven't managed to get you interested so far, bail out now. Maybe it's not going to be the movie for you, but I can't discuss the scene involving Carradine without divulging some spoilers. So last warning, 3, 2, 1. But during the scene where he performs the song that he won an Oscar for this movie, you have 4 women in the audience, all of whom are looking at him, and they all think that he is singing the song I'm Easy to them. And you've got Geraldine Chaplin, and you've got Keith Carradine's actual real-life girlfriend, Christina Rains, who plays Mary, is cheating on her husband with Tom, and she's obviously got a lot of divided loyalties. And then, you've got Shelley Duvall's character in there, and then you have Lily Tomlin, who is the ultimate character that Keith Carradine is truly pursuing. But as you watch the movie, you almost get the sense that maybe even Keith Carradine doesn't even know who he's singing the song to. He just says to the crowd, there might be somebody in the audience that is here tonight that the song goes out to. And of course, all 4 of these women, their hearts just melt as he performs this song. But it's an eerie song, and Keith Carradine, if he hadn't had a successful career as an actor, he probably could have been a full-blown folk singer. And I think he did record a few albums in the late 70s, and he kind of cashed in on the success from this movie. But it's a great scene, and it's preceded by my second favorite scene of the movie, where his trio gets up there and performs the song, Since You've Gone.
Since you've gone, my heart is broken another time.
And this scene's a great example where, even though in this movie you have a lot of songs being performed in full, there's still a hell of a lot going on. Like, if you wanted to criticize this movie with a superficial understanding of it, you might say too many songs are played in their entirety, turning this basically into a musical as opposed to a drama. But during these long 3-minute songs, you have character interactions going on, and there's cross-cutting between different characters, and there's all sorts of strange tensions building. A song is never performed just to have the song. There's always a few other things going on, so I don't even really think of this movie as a musical, even though it's probably got like 2 hours of music performed throughout. But during the performance of the song, you have a complicated scenario where Keith Carradine is performing the song with his real-life girlfriend, who is not a singer, but she trained just for this scene. But if you listen to the commentary, Robert Altman's like, yeah, she's just barely hanging on. And he calls attention to there's one moment where she gets a frog in her throat, and she kind of clears her throat into the microphone, and it stays in the movie because it's so authentic and it's so real. But in character, she is cheating on her husband, who's the other guitar player, who's played by Alan Nichols, who was a last-minute replacement for Gary Busey. And Gary Busey actually wrote the song they're performing, but he got another gig and had to go off and do another show or another movie. But I think Alan Nichols does just fine, because he can also sing his ass off. But it's a bizarre situation where you have sexual tension within the movie, as well as sexual tension like behind the scenes because of the real-life couple, as well as compounded by the fact that you have an actress who probably is not a good enough singer to be playing this role, but Robert Altman doesn't care. He's just going to do it anyway. And there are a lot of actors in this movie who weren't quite good enough to play the role that they were playing, but Robert Altman didn't care. Like, you can make a case that Henry Gibson doesn't have any business singing any of the songs in the movie, even though he wrote a lot of those songs. And he's great at playing that role, but anytime you hear him performing a duet with an actual singer, you realize, oh, wait a second, Henry Gibson, he's an actor, he's not a singer. And then you have the reverse, where you have singers who are being called upon to do a little acting. And I think the best example of that would be Ronnie Blakely as Barbara Jean, where she is an incredible singer. She was a background singer working in Nashville, who they kind of elevated to the stature of full-blown country music star for the movie. But I think for a singer breaking into acting, Ronnie Blakely does a great job. And along those lines, we have Lily Tomlin, who's absolutely incredible as an actor in this movie, but a completely wretched singer. And she's supposed to be a gospel singer in this movie, but the first time you hear her singing, you're like, wait a second, like, did they accidentally use the wrong take? Like, what's going on here? Because she's singing with a choir that's incredible, and you can just hear her voice just kind of like, it's really off-putting. On the other hand, when she's acting with her husband, played by Ned Beatty, or acting with her kids, who are deaf, who are played by real-life deaf actors.
What'd you do, swim today? Did you learn anything?
Huh?
Let him tell it. Well.
And then...
It's just mesmerizing, and just seeing like the way she is just so fascinated by her children, has so much love and affection as she's communicating with them in sign language. Yeah, Lily Tomlin, this is one of her first big movie role, and she just absolutely knocks it right out of the park. And since I mentioned Ned Beatty, who plays Delbert Reese, I should also mention him in conjunction with the character played by Michael Murphy, John Triplett, because they're full-blown political operators. And the political side of this movie is interesting because it's a nonpartisan look at politics, because the movie invents this thing called the replacement party for the sake of the movie. So no matter what your preconceived notions or positions might be about politics, you have to kind of build them from scratch. And because this character is a bit of like a mystery or an empty vessel, you kind of project onto him whatever your own kind of a baggage might be. But the character is Hal Philip Walker. He's the leader of the replacement party. And you're constantly hearing him speaking over this radio in a car, driving around town, sharing all the different positions of his new party. And along the way, Ned Beatty's character and Michael Murphy's character, they're trying to line up what they call like this redneck music, hick music, to be a part of the campaign to help build awareness and build visibility.
As you know, this redneck music is very popular right now, and I've got an awful lot of these local yokels on the bill, you know, singing
Your
this
basic country folk,
crapola, right? So,
or one of the best scenes, Michael Murphy goes to the hotel room of this quarreling couple where he's basically making the pitch. And she keeps saying, well, it doesn't matter because we're registered Democrats. He's like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm a registered Democrat. Like,
But you see, it really doesn't make any difference because we're registered Democrats.
I'm a registered Democrat.
The political cynicism that he expresses is absolutely fascinating. But probably the darkest aspect of this mix of culture and music and celebrity and politics crashing together is when they put together this event. I think they call it a smoker, but it's basically what's supposed to be a strip tease where people just throw out cash and or write checks, make donations to this campaign, but they don't tell the person singing that it's supposed to turn into a strip tease, which leads to one of the most heartfelt, just bruising, just emotionally overwhelming scenes as Gwen Wells, as Suleen Gay, is trying to get through the evening singing her songs, not realizing what is expected of her, and slowly but surely the audience has to turn on her. And she's doing this eerie thing as an actress where she's singing poorly on purpose because the character can't sing. It's pointed out to her many times throughout the movie. You can't sing.
Listen, I don't know how to tell you this, but I've been meaning to tell you this for a long time. You can't sing.
And she just will not accept it. She dreams of being a singer irrespective of her talent. So as a performer, Gwen Wells is having to sing poorly while at the same time getting upset and starting to cry, while at the same time also still trying to perform in a provocative way where eventually she will, in exchange for an additional gig performing with her hero the following day, she will follow through and finish the show. And it's just soul-crushing watching her, like her heart breaking as she follows through. But a few hours later, she's back on top again, and she's got all the confidence in the world as one of her closest friends tries to give her some harsh truths about how this town is just going to step on her soul.
Suleen, you may as well face the fact you cannot sing. You ain't gonna never be no star. I mean, I wish you'd give it up now. I mean, they're gonna kill you. They're gonna tear your heart out if you keep on. They're gonna walk on your soul, girl.
But she's back at it the next day, and she's up on stage, and she's damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. But Gwen Wells absolutely steals the show in every single scene in which she appears. And in the role of her loyal friend who keeps trying to let her down easy and let her know that she has no talent whatsoever, we have Robert Duquie, I think that's how you say his name, who I first saw in RoboCop. He's absolutely incredible in RoboCop, but he plays an absolutely fascinating character where all of his emotions are always right there on the surface, whether he's chastising a fellow African-American who he deems as being a little bit of a marshmallow in terms of the type of music he likes to sing, or when Wade is kind of drunkenly flirting with Lily Tomlin and like drunkenly singing during Since You've Gone. I mean, he just makes me crack up every step of the way throughout this movie. He's absolutely incredible. Everybody's incredible in this. It's just a question of degree, like who is better than others. And some people have small roles, like Jeff Goldblum showing up as the mute magician who's constantly blowing people's minds, but he has pretty, I guess, rudimentary magic tricks, but they work well enough, and he just looks so great with those big shades and that big, it's like a motorcycle, but it's like a three-wheeler. But anytime he pops up on screen, you're like, oh, there's Jeff Goldblum, future superstar. But he was not a superstar at this time. I think pretty much all he had done prior to this was Death Wish. But he's fantastic as what they describe as the silent tricycle man. And you also have Barbara Baxley in there as Lady Pearl, who runs a bluegrass club, but she's also really into politics, or at least she was really into politics in the 1960s, thanks to the Kennedy boys.
Only time I ever went hog wild around the bend was for the Kennedy boys. But they were different.
And those are some of the most moving, but also most overt passages about politics in this movie, where she's talking about the impression they made on her back in the 1960s and what ultimately ended up happening to them. And obviously that's a bit of foreshadowing for how this movie is going to end, because this movie ends on a very dark note. And famously, some really famous person who was working with the screenwriter bailed on the movie out of protest for what ultimately ends up happening to the character of Barbara Jean. And Robert Altman says, like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I think this movie needs like a downbeat ending to really hit the message home like a sledgehammer. But in the commentary, he refused to admit who left the production over the controversial ending, but I think the ending is what has turned this movie into an absolute Hall of Fame classic. But there are two main characters that I haven't really gotten into yet that I need to get into, but we might as well shift into the music. And I have to be very careful when discussing the music in this movie, because YouTube is famously very sensitive when it comes to issues of music, but it's hard to discuss a movie that's 2 hours and 40 minutes long about music without including some. So if I end up getting blocked, I mean, I posted the trailer earlier just as a test, and that got outright blocked. Not like ad revenue redirected, but just blocked entirely. I'll just end up putting this video on Vimeo and just sharing the password with people, because I do want to include at least a little bit of music.
I want you to study real hard, because just remember, any one of you can grow up to be the president.
Well, I like to go to Memphis, but I don't know the way.
You can't celebrate the performances of Karen Black and Ronnie Blakely without discussing their incredible performances as Connie White and Barbara Jean. And I want to call attention to a comment made by the screenwriter Joan Tewksbury when it comes to these iconic characters, where she says, Connie White and Barbara Jean are the personification of Nashville rivalries, the prototype of what Nashville music wanted its women to look like. Tammy Wynette, Dolly Parton. These women are tough, but my God, they believe in religion. Dolly's up at 4 in the morning writing her songs and saying her prayers, and she's not bullshitting you about that. There is great heart to these women. And there's a great scene deep into the movie where one of the political operatives is asking if he can get both of those performers on stage at the same time.
Hey, do you think we can get Connie out to the round?
That's a good looking tie.
Connie White and Barbara Jean never appear on the same stage together.
You always had
Connie
class,
can
didn't
replace
you?
Barbara Jean, but that's it.
But then Henry Gibson's character very calmly explains how you will never get both of those performers on the same stage at the same time. One might be willing to replace the other, but never at the same time. Like, all right, I got it. These two girls, while they might be nice to each other in public, they are rivals and they despise one another. But as far as the great performers of the 70s are concerned, I'm obsessed with Karen Black. She is absolutely incredible. And I've watched 5 Easy Pieces probably 20 times, and that might be my favorite role that she performed. But a close second might be her as Connie White in this movie. And she's not a professional country singer, but she comes pretty goddamn close. And there are only a few moments in the movie like, ooh, you can't quite hit that note, or it might be too deep for you. But on the whole, she is very convincing and very persuasive, and she is just so goddamn funny. And the way she interacts with people and the way she kind of plays with her dress and has that crazy looking hair, Karen Black is just delivering an absolute Hall of Fame performance as Connie White in this movie, right alongside that of Ronnie Blakely, Barbara Jean. And the first songs bought for this movie were songs performed by Ronnie Blakely. But admittedly, she was a background singer. She wasn't a huge superstar, but she will convince you otherwise in this movie because of all the performers in this movie. She definitely comes across the best in terms of being this big, legendary, powerful performer. And my favorite songs in the movie, or some of my favorite songs in the movie, are when she just goes all out.
It hurts so bad, it gets me down, down, down.
She just absolutely bears her soul for the audience. On the other hand, though, because she's been performing her entire life, she's become incredibly emotionally and physically fragile. And she, as she says, like, you know, Barbara Jean's had another collapse, but she keeps collapsing and just like rambling, and just her mind and her body are coming unglued, which makes her ultimate fate all the more impactful, where she's in the middle of singing the song about her parents, where she ends it, she goes, for mama and daddy, and it's so sincere and it's so genuine. And then this crazy fucking assassin who's obsessed with celebrity stands up and shoots her. And you never find out whether she lives or dies. All you hear is her husband saying, oh my God, I can't stop all that blood. but it's an absolutely horrific ending, or at least it leads into the ending. That is horrific, and then everybody tries to rally by singing a song at the end, but just it's emotionally devastating when Barbara Jean goes down, because she is by far the most vulnerable, fragile, sympathetic character probably in the entire movie. So let's talk a little bit about the assassin in this movie, because obviously the political assassinations of the 1960s of the Kennedys as well as Martin Luther King weighed heavily on the brain of Robert Altman, and he felt very intensely about including this detail at the end. But a few years later, when John Lennon was killed in 1980, people in a weird way tried to almost kind of implicate Robert Altman in that killing, because they felt like the killing of John Lennon eerily mirrored the killing at the end of Nashville. And here's a little excerpt from Wikipedia of what Robert Altman had to say at that time. When John Lennon was assassinated, I got a call immediately from the Washington Post, and they said, "Do you feel responsible for this?" And I said, "What do you mean responsible?" "Well, I mean, you're the one that predicted there would be a political assassination of a star." And I said, "Well, I don't feel responsible." But I said, "But don't you feel responsible for not heeding my warning?" The statement here is these people are not assassinated because of their ideas or what they do. They're assassinated to draw attention to the assassin. And in political assassinations, in their sort of warped minds, they know that they're going to have a certain amount of people who said, "That son of a bitch, the politician, should have been shot," because there's such heat about it. But actually what they're doing is killing somebody who's in the public eye and is some sort of an icon, because this feeling that by doing that, committing that assassination, they draw the attention to themselves and they make themselves consequently important. And it's no surprise to me, the Lennon assassination, because this is what all that is. And I don't think we've seen the end of it either. In any event, I think having the assassination attempt in this movie right at the end of the song, "My Idaho Home," that's what really that's what brings this movie in for just a truly devastating landing that makes it absolutely unforgettable. But I guess as a way of starting to wrap this up, we got to close on the music, because as I mentioned before, this movie was a little controversial at the time, because a lot of stars felt like, why are you celebrating these people who are just actors pretending, and they're not even performing the famous songs, they're writing their own songs, like what is going on here? But there are a few luminaries that are tucked away in this movie, like all the people who are in the background bands, they're all local musicians. I mean, Robert Altman did his best to only hire locals when it came to the performers. And there are a few superstars tucked away in there, like the violin player Vassar Clements, and he even gets a great shout out by Karen Black during the performance. But ultimately, we need to give a shout out to Richard Baskin, who is the musical director for this movie. And you see him scattered throughout the movie. He's the guy with the long hair, and sometimes he's on the piano playing poorly.
Bob.
Yes, sir.
What did you say the piano player's name was?
Frog.
Yeah.
And early on in the movie, when he's been given a lot of grief during a recording session, you actually get a cameo of Robert Altman, his voice, as the country star is complaining to Bob in the recording studio. But Richard Baskin, he's absolutely incredible. And it fell on his shoulders to get the right musicians and the right songwriters and the right actors coming together for these songs. And I think he deserves a huge amount of credit for the ultimate success of this movie. And while we're on the subject of the music, I do need to give a shout out to the fucking epic opening title sequence, which I think is a strong contender for the best title sequence ever made by any filmmaker in any era. But it was designed by Dan Perry, and he had previously worked on a little-known movie called The Exorcist. But what's so great about that intro is how it manages to give you a taste of all the best songs that you're going to hear over the course of the movie, while introducing all the major characters, and at the same time acting as a bit of like pop culture commentary and all the records being sold on TV at that time. I'm old enough where I can remember in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s where these compilation records would be sold in commercials, and they would just go through like little snippets of all the different songs, and that was how they would market these records. But the fact that they were able to turn a commercial for the soundtrack into the title sequence for the movie, I think it's just chef's kiss, an absolute stroke of genius, and it's just one of many ingredients that makes this movie so goddamn fun to watch. But once again, Altman, he is totally fine with sharing credit and sharing like the accolades when it comes to his cast and crew, because as he'll say, every movie you make, if you change one ingredient, like one actor or one musician or whatever, the new movie that it becomes is a unique movie that can only be made by those people. And just to give you an example, originally Robert Duvall was supposed to play the part, played by Henry Gibson, but Robert Altman, he strikes me as somebody where he's very nimble and he's very flexible, and if you lose Robert Duvall due to another movie, well then now you're just making the movie with Henry Gibson, and the movie is unique where only Henry Gibson can give you that that performance. And I just find that attitude so refreshing, where Robert Altman doesn't have a preconceived notion of what he needs the movie to be ahead of time. He makes the movie, and he allows the movie to kind of push him around depending upon which cast and crew he's able to line up for that particular production. And he just got really, really lucky, where his collaborators on this movie, from the writing to the music to the acting to the photography, they were all firing on all cylinders. Speaking of all those collaborators, I need to give a shout out to assistant director Alan Rudolph, who went on to have a major filmmaking career of his own. And if you go over to the Criterion Collection, they're actually running right now a little Alan Rudolph retrospective, but he would work with Keith Carradine. But he started out working with Robert Altman before launching his own career. But just to start wrapping up this video, I guess the reason I keep coming back to this movie is just that it's an absolute joy to watch. I mean, you can talk all day about the technique and the politics and it being a time capsule and all that stuff, but there are just certain sequences where my heart soars, like the song Dues, performed by Ronnie Blakely, is absolutely incredible. Or as I mentioned before, I really like Since You've Gone and I'm Easy. I find those scenes to just be hauntingly beautiful. And I think Robert Altman, he's one of the great observers of the 1970s, where he's just, he's soaking it all in and just giving us a story that is rich and Americana, with, like, you know, all the freaks and maniacs and celebrities and local yokels and, you know, people with dreams of stardom all coming together. It's just unlike anything else that I've ever seen before. And so even if I occasionally have a few harsh words to say about Robert Altman movies where it doesn't all completely come together, once again, he's an incredibly prolific director. Not all of his movies are created equal. I saw some people online saying that any movie with Shelley Duvall is automatically a good movie. I'm like, well, that's kind of a childish attitude to have. It's a little bit like saying, like, nah, I don't want to listen. Like, it's all great. Robert Altman had peaks and valleys, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging the peaks and valleys, especially when you end up with a masterpiece like Nashville. And I try not to use the word masterpiece lightly, but I think it's well earned by Nashville, which is one of the most influential movies. It's one of the most influential movies of my favorite decade of filmmaking. I mean, I'm always kind of torn between the early 30s and the early 70s, but if I'm being realistic, whether you're talking about blockbusters or art house or everything in between, the 70s is a very rich vein of cinematic gold. No matter what are your favorites from that period, Nashville will always be a part of that conversation. But I think at this point I've said all that I need to say. I've got plenty more notes, and I could go on and on and on with a lot more kind of trivia and little details and that sort of thing. But if I do, I might end up running the risk of making a video that's just as long as the film itself, which would be completely and totally ridiculous. So I hope I've encouraged some of you to either see the movie for the first time or go back and revisit it. I've been watching it over and over and over again for like 25 years now, and once again, it always has fresh discoveries to be made, or you can just gain a deeper, richer appreciation for the ingredients that you already love. It is a true Hall of Fame, just movie classic, and yeah, I'll probably never get tired of watching this movie until the day I die. But as far as upcoming anniversary videos are concerned, I'll be tackling Jaws next week. That movie represented a major seismic shift in movie making overall, so I'm looking forward to tackling that. Quite a different movie from Nashville. And in July, I'm going to be tackling a 75th anniversary double feature of 2 movies by Anthony Mann. He had 2 movies come out within a few weeks of each other, but I'll be tackling Winchester 73 and The Fury. So I'm really excited to tackle those westerns next month. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you enjoyed the video, or hunt me down on social media. But I look forward to hearing people's thoughts on Robert Altman, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.